Hi guys, it's Ms. Miner, and this is 5C. And today, what we want to do today is we want to start putting everything that we've learned about the slope-intercept equation together and kind of use all of the information that we've learned about our slope-intercept equation to write an equation or graph it. And so I'm going to give you some tables. I'm going to give you some graphs. I'm going to give you maybe a point. And we're going to just kind of start putting everything that we've learned together into one lesson. And so we're going to have to use some knowledge from Unit 4 and some knowledge from Unit 5 in order to be able to do that. So a lot of what we're doing today is review, but we're going to combine some ideas maybe and just kind of remember a lot of the things that we've learned about our slope-intercept equation so that we can start to use that knowledge and apply it to whatever type of linear information we are given. Okay, also in today's lesson, we want to be able to identify errors in a slope-intercept equation. So we're going to use our knowledge in order to be able to look at some data and say, oh, hey, this is where maybe this data has an error in it. Okay, so that's kind of where we're going today with today's lesson. So not really new information, but trying to kind of solidify everything that we've learned up to this point about our slope-intercept equation. Okay, so the first thing that I want to kind of go over and try and help you guys remember is we're going to start with our equation, our slope-intercept equation. And really we said that in this equation, we can get the slope and the y-intercept from a lot of things. And so we're just going to kind of remind ourselves what we're looking for from different types of information. Okay, so if I want to calculate my slope number, let's say I have a story problem. What kind of things would I be looking for in a story problem in order to be able to identify the slope from a story problem or what we call a real world context? And so let's kind of just make a list here. I'm going to kind of draw a table and we're going to make a list. And the M, remember, represents the slope. It is our slope number. And it, if we have, let's just kind of let's make a good table here. And this would be something that'd be awesome to write down in your notes. And I'll just kind of make a table here and we'll just kind of say, okay, if I'm looking at a story problem, what kinds of things would I be looking for in my story problem in order to be able to find the slope? And remember, in the story problem, I look for specific words that mean, that I'm increasing or decreasing by a certain amount. And those words are words like per, each, every, some kind of rate. A unit rate is what we call it. Like miles per gallon or dollars per item, something like that. Okay, so those things in a story problem identify slope. So what about the y-intercept in a story problem? What kinds of things do I look for in a story problem to identify my y-intercept? Well, I look for words like fee, right? Some kind of starting amount. An initial value. And in fact, we even use the letter B as the word begin, right? Because it's a beginning amount. It's some kind of starting amount, okay? And so if I am given a story problem, these are the kinds of things that I can look for in order to be able to identify my slope and my y-intercept. Okay, so what if I have a graph? If I have a graph, then I am looking for my rise over my run. In order to find my slope, I look for my rise over my run. And if I want to identify the y-intercept, I look for the point on my y-axis that my line crosses through. So some point where x is 0, right? So on a graph, that's what I'm looking for. That point that my line crosses through the y-axis. Okay, what if I have a table or 2 points? Something like that. Well, remember, then I'm looking for the change in my y value divided by the change in my x value. So in a table, remember, I try and figure out how much did it change? How much did it go up or down between my y values? How much did it go up or down in my x values? Sorry, that's supposed to be the x values. And this represents my rise, and this represents my run on my graph, right? And so that's why we look for the change, because we really are trying to find out how much did it rise up between 2 points, and then how much did it run across the graph between 2 points. And if I want to find the y-intercept from a table or 2 points, then I actually use my equation, y equals mx plus b, and I plug in my slope and a point into my equation, and then I solve to find b. I'm going to extend this page down just a little bit. So there are some things that we might have to remember about our slope-intercept equation in order to be able to complete everything that we need to do today. And we're going to kind of be using this idea of finding slope, finding the y-intercept. We might be asked to write an equation. We might be asked to graph that equation. And so those are some things we might have to work backward in order to be able to do some of these things today. Okay. So make sure that you have this written down in your notes. If you need to pause the video and then get it all written down, make sure you do that, because this is very important to remember. This is kind of the crux of what we've been learning for the past couple of units, and we're going to take all of this stuff and kind of work through it and use it to help us. Whatever we're asked about our slope-intercept equation, whatever we're asked to do, we want to be able to do that. Put all of the ideas together. Okay, so let's just start with some basic story problems, okay? And what this is asking us is, okay, well, I want to write the equation out and then graph it. And so there's a couple of different ways that we've learned how to graph it. You know, we started out by using a table, an XY table, in order to graph our story problems. But now we know that we can take our equation and we can use our equation to graph our information. And so here's an idea where we're going to combine two ideas together, because now we know we can actually graph straight from the equation. We don't have to make a table. But I want you to know, making a table is a good fallback method. So if you need to make a table, start by figuring out some data points, right? And I'm just putting some data on there. This isn't very good data, but this is just fake data, right? But anyways, you could come up with a data table and use those points to graph, or you can use your steps for graphing an equation in order to be able to graph the the equation from the story problem now. So again, we're combining those ideas together and trying to use those ideas that we've learned over the last couple of units with these linear equations. Okay, so let's start out by just writing the equations for each of these lines, right? And seeing what happens. So the temperature outside has remained 3 degrees all day. So kind of think about in your mind, what's happening? Is the temperature going up? Is the temperature going down? What did you decide? In this situation, the temperature is just remaining the same all day long. It's not going up, it's not going down. And so this is one of those things where we don't have a slope, we have a zero slope, right? The temperature is remaining constant all day. So in this case, the equation is y equals 3. And what does my graph look like if my temperature remains constant all day long? It doesn't go up, it doesn't go down. Well, if you said that it's a flat line, right, then you are correct, because that's what happens, right? The graph of this is no matter what's happening, my temperature is going to be staying the same all the time. So there's my graph of y equals 3. Some of these, it might be beneficial for you to go ahead and pause the video and try and do some of these on your own. Again, we're not really learning anything new. We're just kind of taking the information that we've learned so far and deciding, what kind of skills do I have to be able to solve these problems? So maybe pause the video, try some on your own, see where you get stuck. If there's a place where you get stuck, then, turn the video on and watch. Maybe I'll give you some helpful tips or tricks to be able to move you forward in the right direction. Okay. All right, so number 2, Amelia is 6 miles from home, and she runs towards home at a rate of 6 minutes per mile. Again, going back to our starting page here, when I have a story problem, right, I'm looking for specific words to help me figure out this equation. So look for those words and use your notes to help you. If I have a story problem, then use the story problem part of that in order to be able to set up your equation, right? Another thing you might want to start out with is, remember, when we write our equation, we can kind of use this setup, y equals blank, x plus blank, and then just fill in our blanks, right? And so for this first blank, I'm looking for the slope, so I'm looking for words like per, and here's a per, and this is minutes per mile. And so there's a unit rate. And so the number that I'm looking for my slope here is 6. And then she starts out, her starting amount of miles is also 6. So my equation that I want to graph is y equals 6x plus 6. And so there's a couple of different ways that I can do this. I can make an XY table and find some data points, right? Where I say, okay, if x were a 0, right, then what would y be? If x were a 1, then what would y be? If x were a 2, then what would y be? Right? And so I can get some data points. And then I go to my graph and I graph those data points. Well, if that doesn't work, the other thing that I can do is I can use my steps for graphing a linear equation in order to graph this. So I can start by putting a point where x is 0 and y is 6. And then I can use my slope as a rise and a run in order to find the next point. And remember, if I try and rise 6, I'm going to go way up off this graph. So if I want to go in the opposite direction on a graph, all I have to do is literally go in the opposite direction from what I was going before. These were both positive, so I'm going to change them and go both in the negative direction to find my next point. So that means I'm going to go down 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and over 1. And put my point there, and then use my ruler to draw in my line. Okay, so now we can kind of see where our line's going. All right, there's my line on my graph. That's what it looks like. Let's do the next one. Y equals blank x plus blank. Maybe a good time would be to pause the video right now, try this one on your own, see how you do. I'm fine with either method. If you like making a table, make a table. If you like using the slope and the y-intercept graph, use the slope and y-intercept graph. Okay, hopefully you pause the video and you can check your work. I'll kind of go through this one. The temperature outside is -6 and it rises 3 degrees every hour. Well, here's the word every, right? And so that was one of the indicators of our slope. And so this is the starting temperature. That's going to be where I start my graph. And so I'm going to start by putting a point at 0, -6 because that's my beginning point. And then it's rising 3 degrees every hour. Remember, if I have a whole numbered slope, I always put a 1 underneath it. This will be my rise. This will be my run down here. And I'm going to rise 3. 1, 2, 3. Run 1. Put a point right there. And if I want some additional points on my graph, I can just keep counting my slope from each new point. So from this new point that I just made, I'm going to count my slope again, just so that I get my line in there fairly accurately. And I can see where my line's going. And there's our graph. Okay, so try number 4 on your own and then come back and see how you did. All right, so Emily has $0 in her piggy bank. She plans to save $2 each week. There's the slope word that we're looking for. And so my equation is going to be y equals 2x plus 0. My starting point is going to be right in the middle because this will be 0, 0. And then I use my slope to count to the next point, rise 2 over 1. And I can find some points going in that direction. If I want some points going in the opposite direction, remember, all I have to do is go in the opposite direction that I was going. These were both positive numbers before, and I was going up and to the right. So now, if I want the points on the other side of my graph, I go in the opposite direction. I go down and to the left. And so if I do that, if I start right back in the middle again with my beginning point, I can go down and to the left and find those points that are on the opposite side of my line. I just go in the opposite direction. And then I'd put my ruler on there. And this one I made a whole bunch of points on so I can get my line pretty accurate. I'm going to just wiggle it in there just a little bit better. Okay, there we go. And there's that line, and I can really see where that line's going. Okay. Here are some more example problems. We're just going to kind of go through them, try and remember everything. Use the notes that we took at the very beginning of the lesson in order to be able to help you with this. A good idea would be, if you want, pause the video, see if you can do it on your own, see what you can remember, and then come back, check your work, or if you get stuck in a certain place, then see if you can figure out what's happening and why you're getting stuck. Okay, number 1 says, write an equation in slope-intercept form to represent the relationship on the graph. That just means write an equation, right? So what I want to get at the very end is y equals blank x plus blank. I want to fill in my equation with my slope and my y-intercept. And so in order to be able to do that, I've got to find my slope. What does m equal? And I've got to find my y-intercept. What does b equal? So my slope is my rise over my run. So I want to pick 2 good points off the graph. It doesn't really matter which ones I choose. I just need 2. And then I draw in my step. I count my rise. I count my run. and I write my rise over my run. One thing that I can't forget when I am looking for my slope on my graph is to decide whether this is a positive or a negative slope. And in order to do that, I have to read my graph. I have to look at the left side of my line and look at the right side of my line and decide, is this from left to right? Does it go up or does it go down? And this line from left to right goes down, and so this has to be a negative slope. The last thing I'm going to do with my slope is I'm going to divide it or simplify it, and this one's going to simplify and become slope is equal to a -1. So now I know the first part of my equation, y equals -1. Now I just need to worry about the y-intercept. The y-intercept is the place where my line crosses my y-axis. And so here's my y-axis right in the middle of my graph. And I'm just looking for the place where my line, this black line, is crossing my y-axis. And it is a place. Remember, the y-intercept is a location where x is 0 and then y is a number. And so I have to figure out what number y is right there. Well, this is where y is equal to 2. And so my y-intercept here is 2. Y equals 2 right there. So that's my equation. Okay, number 2, let's work on this one. Again, in order to be able to write an equation, the directions say write an equation in slope-intercept form to represent the relationship shown on the table. So my ultimate goal here is going to be able to write an equation, y equals blank x plus blank, and fill in those blanks with my slope and my y-intercept. So those are the two things I need to be able to write my equation. In order to get my slope is just the change in the y values over the change in the x values. So here my y value started at -6 and ended up at 0. So I added 6 in order to get there. That's the change in my y values. The change in my x values, I started at -2, got to 0, so I was adding 2 there. Then I just take my change in my x value, put it under the change in my y values. My slope is 6/2, which reduces to 3. So in this case, my slope is 3. Now I just have to find my y-intercept. Well, guess what? My y-intercept is always where x is equal to 0. And look at this. In my x column, I have a 0. And so I immediately know that whatever my y value is right here, that's going to be my y-intercept. So this one was really easy because I had a 0 in my x column. But let's imagine that I didn't know that that was the case, or maybe I just didn't notice that 0 in my x column. What I can do instead is use one of my points to solve and find out what my y-intercept is. So I'm going to just split screen this really quick, but I am going to add in a blank page so that I can just kind of have some extra space in order to solve. Remember, in order to solve for my y-intercept, what I do is I actually take the slope-intercept formula and I put in my new slope that I just found. That's going to go in my equation where the m goes. And then I pick one of my x and y values off of the table and I put it into my equation. X is 2 and y is 6. And then I just solve to find out what b is. So I multiply 3 times 2 and get 6 plus b is equal to 6. I can solve by subtracting 6 from both sides. These cancel, and so b is equal to 0. So even if I don't know the quick method, right, then I can use my knowledge to solve and find out what the y-intercept is. Okay, let's make this big again. Let's go back to single page, and let's do the next one, 2 points. Okay, write an equation in slope-intercept form to represent the line that passes through the two given points. So I can take these 2 points. If I want to write a slope-intercept equation, what I need to do is figure out my slope and figure out my y-intercept. In order to do that, I just do almost identical to what I did over here. I am going to kind of make a little XY table out of my points. And remember, in a point, the X number comes first, the Y number comes second. And I'm going to find my slope by identifying how much did it change in its y values, how much did it change in its x values. So from negative 14 to positive 2, that's increasing by 12. And from negative 2 to 0, that's increasing by 2. I can take my x value, put it underneath my y value, and then divide those numbers to get a slope of 6. Then I want to take my equation, y equals mx plus b, and pick one of my points, right? Oh, you know what I just noticed? Look, here's a 0 in the x column, right? Here's a 0 in the x column. So if I recognize that, my y-intercept is whatever y number I have there. So there again, we had it nice and easy. We didn't even have to go through and do all of the solving here. Okay, let's do one more like that. This one we will have to solve because I can see both of my x values are not 0. So we're going to have to solve to find the y-intercept on this one. I might want to split screen this again and just give myself a little bit more room to work over here. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do, if I'm going to write an equation, is I want to find the slope. And so I take my 2 points, here's an x and a y, and I put them on an xy table. And here's an x and a y. And I figure out how much did it change between its y values. This one is increasing by 25. And this one over here is increasing by 25 as well. So I can take my x value, put it underneath my y value, and so my slope number in this case is going to be 1. 25 divided by 25 is just 1. And then I want to find my y-intercept. So I'm going to use my slope-intercept formula, and I'm going to put in the information that I have. And the information that I have right now is that the slope is 1. And then I also have these 2 points, and they are on the line. So I know I can use them as xy values in my slope-intercept equation. So I'm just going to pick one of these, and I'm going to put those values in for x and y, and then solve to find out what b is. Negative 1 times 5. Remember, when I'm solving equations, I always simplify first. So I want to go ahead and multiply those two numbers together and simplify this. That's going to make that negative 5 plus b is equal to negative 5. And then in order to get b alone, I'm going to add 5 to both sides. And so when I finish solving this, b is going to be equal to 0. And so my equation will be y equals 1x plus 0. Okay, last and finally, today on our homework, we're going to do what I call find, fix, and justify. In a find, fix, and justify, what I'm doing is I'm taking a look at the information that's been given to me, and I'm trying to identify the mistake. Then I'm going to try and correct it and tell what I did in order to be able to correct it, right? So let's take a look at this, and it says that there's an incorrect equation. This is not the right equation. But here is the graph, and the graph is correct. So we have to find the mistake in the equation. The best way to do that, I think, is to just go ahead and find the correct equation from the graph. So y equals blank x plus blank, right? Let's find the correct equation first, and then we'll compare our equation that we got from the graph to the incorrect equation above and see if we can identify what the mistake is. Okay, so what we need to do in order to be able to write the equation is we need to come up with a slope. And remember, the slope is the rise divided by the run. And so I need to pick 2 good points on my graph and draw in my step. I'm going to count the rise, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to count the run, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And I'm going to put my rise over my run. And then I simplify. I'm going to reduce this actually. And so my slope comes out as 1/3. Now I always want to check and see if it's a positive or a negative slope. And I always read my graph from left side to right side. So the left side of this line going to the right side of this line goes down. And so this is going to be a negative 1/3 slope. Then I want to identify my y-intercept. My y-intercept is right here at this point, and that is the point where x is 0 because it's on my y-axis, and y is -4. And so my y-intercept value is going to be -4. And so the equation that I got was y equals -1/3 x minus 4. Now when I compare that up here, what is the mistake? I can see that I'm missing this negative right here. So the mistake is the slope should be negative. And so we're going to write a little sentence in there that talks about what the mistake is. All right, a good idea would be maybe pause the video now and try this next problem and see if you can identify the mistake. Then come back and check your work. So pause the video now and try the next one on your own to see how you do. Okay, hopefully you tried this one on your own. You're going to identify the mistake in the equation. And so the first thing that I should do is figure out what the correct equation should be. And so I'm going to pick a couple of good points on my line and draw in my slope. This is 2 and 1. And so my slope is going to be 2/1 or just 2. And then my y-intercept is right up here where x is equal to 4, or I'm sorry, y is equal to 4. And so my equation that I got is y equals 2x plus 4. If I compare that up here, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to even do what it is I told you to do before. Check up here and see, is my slope positive or negative? This one is negative. And so when I compare my equation that I got to the original equation, I can see that their y-intercept was wrong. And so I'm going to write a sentence that says something like y-intercept should be 4, not 2. And there we go. Okay, so I think that's the end of today's lesson. Yeah, that's the end of today's lesson. And so make sure that if you have any questions or you get stuck somewhere, that you're getting help from me or Mrs. Eider. Email us or join us for one of our help sessions after school or online. Okay, thanks guys. Good luck.